Sarah slips into the corner booth of Lou's Diner just as the neon lights flicker to life against the twilight sky. This isn't just any dinner run, it's her third visit this week, and not for the food. She catches the eye of Marco, the waiter with the perpetually crooked name tag. Without opening a menu, she simply states, 1 cheeseburger, 1 vanilla shake. Marco nods, his pen never touching the notepad. No questions about how she wants it cooked, what cheese she prefers, or if she'd like whipped cream. He simply absorbs the input, offers that curious smile, and vanishes behind the swinging doors. Sarah taps her fingers against the Formica tabletop, watching the condensation race down the window beside her. The kitchen's inner workings remain a mystery. Distant clatters and sizzles the only evidence of its existence. She's never seen inside, never needed to. 8 minutes later, she times it. Marco emerges with her order. Perfect, consistent, exactly as expected. The burger aligned precisely on the plate, the shake at the optimal thickness. Marco, she whispers as he turns to leave. What happens back there? He pauses, straightening his tie. I'm just the interface, ma'am. I translate requests and deliver responses. And what if I asked for sushi? She tests. His expression doesn't change. Status 404, ma'am. Not available. Then he adds, though, I could recommend the tuna melt. It's the closest approximation in our system. Sarah takes a bite of her burger, identical to Tuesday's, identical to last week's. Predictable, reliable. She watches as Marco intercepts another customer's complex, meandering order and distills it into its essence before disappearing again. The waiter isn't merely an API, he's the perfect API. Elegant, intuitive, invisible. Between you and the chaos of the kitchen, he's the beautiful abstraction. No credentials needed, no documentation required. Just simple requests and consistent responses. The most powerful systems are often the ones you never have to think about. Sarah finishes her meal, leaves her payment, and exits into the night. Tomorrow, she'll return with a new request, just to see how the interface handles it.
All right, so maybe that was a little scary, a little heavy, but nevertheless, we're going to go on in the story continues building your first API with JSON formatting. So really, we started with this story to kind of frame it in a way that's sort of relatable, okay? So why do we need APIs? We're working with user-facing software. So picture on the left, something like Voiceflow. I've been using Voiceflow a lot. It's this way to make agentic workflows, and then you run the API, and then you have this database on the other side. So for example, Airtable, think of it as sort of like a spreadsheet or Google Sheets, and it's where you put data. And the analogy is that you've got the customer there on the left, and they're ordering food. In this case, the food is like data, and the API is like the waiter or the host person, like that person who comes and goes between the customer and the kitchen, and then the kitchen is where all that data is stored, the database, right? And so we are going to use this analogy and work it a little bit in our sexy API story here. So to continue it, we're using a format called JSON, and it said JSON. So you see that written there. It's a kind of JavaScript, and it's special for writing APIs. So we're going to talk about 5 components of API calls. First, the type of API. Second, links. Each one will have a link or a URL that you see in the address bar. Number 3, headers. Number 4, parameters. Number 5 will be the body. And number 6, the things that happen next. So let's dive in. The 3 types of API calls that we'll talk about today, and there's lots of different types. There's delete and put, and others. Just start with these three: get, post, and patch. So what does the get API do? The get API asks that waiter to go to the kitchen, the API to go to the database and grab some data and bring it to the customer. And then when we're using the post one, it's like, hey, can you go put this food into the kitchen actually, and maybe start a new order on a plate, and I'm actually putting a plate together. Maybe a patch is when you have a shelf or a plate or order maybe, and you're adding to it. So in the spreadsheet or in a database or a relational database where we have rows and columns, we're going to add a new row when we do a post, and then we're going to add to that row something new when we do a patch. So the patch is adding to what is already there on that row. Okay, so back to the 5 components of API calls. We talked about the three of these really common types of APIs, and number 2 is the link. So if you think about that as the location of the kitchen, and really, as I mentioned, it's just a location, a URL. Okay, it's a domain kind of thing, a space where something is. It's a location. So it's almost like directions to, like, or coordinates. Like, where's this thing? Oh, that's where it is. And you'll notice with each API of the database that you're using, it'll have different parts, but the first part of it just looks like a normal website. So like Airtable is a common one. I'll show you in the use case. And Airtable, the first part of it is like airtable.com or whatever. You see that familiar thing that and it's really just a link. A lot of these things we just copy and paste them over. And so when you see that link, just think, oh, that's like the kitchen. That's the location of the kitchen where this database is. Okay, that makes sense. Number 3 is the headers. And you're going to have one or more headers. And, I'm not an expert in APIs, but I know I can copy and paste headers, right? We can all just look at, okay, headers. Okay, they go from here and they go over to there. So think of that as the API key and other pieces that are needed. So we'll go into that a little later. Parameters won't be in the use case today, but we will, I'm including this because they're often needed. And then number 5 is the body. And the body is basically what's on the menu. So if we're looking and we're like, okay, here's what we want to do, whether we're saying, okay, I'm the manager of the restaurant and I'm gonna post some new food in the kitchen, or whether I'm a customer in the restaurant and I'm going to ask the waiter to get me some food. I want to get some food over here. And so loose analogy, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's, if you want some food brought out to you, if you want some data brought out to you, then you can use an API to get it. So next we're going to go into some depth on the body. There's a bunch of different little pieces of English punctuation that we use, and a lot of languages use similar punctuation, but we're talking about how to order an API. So we're talking about the food or the data and what this order looks like. If you go to a French restaurant, you're going to order probably in French a little bit. And if you're in, Italy, hopefully you're able to learn some Italian and you order Italian in JSON. We're going to use some punctuation in order to do this. So we've got brackets, and you'll see like, these brackets, why are they here? Why are they there? Well, you don't have to worry so much about why they're there. But knowing just like, okay, those are the normal brackets that I see on my keyboard. And if I accidentally delete one or something, I can just put it back. I can kind of figure out where it goes, because you might have learned in making an Excel formula, if you have those parentheses in there, it's a similar idea. In fact, we also have curly braces, and these are a little different. But they're just when you push, you normally push the keyboard for the bracket, and you're just holding down Shift in order to get that curly brace. And when you have one, you have to have a second one. They come in pairs, and so where there's one of these, you'll find another one. It has a buddy. Similar with quotes, quotation marks. If there's one, you gotta have another one. And you're kind of just looking for the symmetry, right? Because this stuff tends to be somewhat symmetrical. And, so if you're like, oh, there's only one quote there, I need a second quote on the end of this word or this phrase. That's kind of a rule of thumb, is like there should be some symmetry. So next is the colon. In JSON, you'll see colons, and then you have the comma. So within the body, you'll have the comma. And the comma, one thing that's special about it is that it helps us make a list. And so if you only have one thing on that list, then you don't really need a comma. So pay attention to that. If you've got a comma on there and you're like, wait, this is only sort of one thing, I haven't really duplicated what I'm asking for here. I'm not ordering 2 plates of food. I only have 1 plate of food. Then you might want to delete that comma. Or if you say, oh, in this case, I'm gonna need 2 plates of food, and then you may need the comma. So in our use case today, you won't need the comma. But really important to note, like, oh wait, I've got to get rid of that because I've only ordering for 1 today. Next is the apostrophe, and this is something that when we're copying and pasting this code around, you won't have to really write very much code, if any at all. But when you're copying and pasting, you got to watch where you do that mouse click. So in other videos that you'll see, you just have to be careful where you're clicking around that apostrophe, and really it's just an apostrophe, nothing to be afraid of. Any of these English punctuation, like if you got a bad grade in grammar, like don't let that bother you. Like today is a new day, and you can use these little things on your keyboard just as well as anyone else, and it's mostly just copying and pasting. So watch for that apostrophe. Then you have a period, and this is just the same period that you see anywhere, right? So watch for the period. There's little meanings behind all this. It's very symbolic, and normal people like you and me who are not experts in coding and development, like we don't know why the period is there, but we can look at the period and say, we can look at the examples, and we can look at the patterns and say, oh, that needs a period there. Okay, I see what that is. Okay, let's jump into the body, and we'll think of this as, of course, how are we asking for the data that we're either going to get or post or patch. And so this is an example request. When we say that word request, it's like sort of like we're making an order or we're making a call. You'll hear the word call a lot. Question for you. If you remember the 3 types of API calls, right? Get is read this to me, or go get some food from the kitchen for me, will you? Post is we're going to put some food in the kitchen, maybe a new order, and then the patch is like, oh, and we're going to put some fries on that plate as well. So these are the 3 types of API calls. Now, which one do you think is this is going to be? Which type of API call is this? Yes, there is a post in the body. And if you said post, you are correct. That is what's being told to us here. And really this word curl it's a command URL. So in an address bar, when you type in an address on the internet and you're looking and you're like, oh, I'm at google.com, like it's a URL. It's the same old thing that you've seen a million times before. The C on it just means it's a command URL. So we've got this example request here, okay? And we're just going through the body, and we've got the curl, okay? We know what kind of API we're working with here. And now is the location of the kitchen, right? And this is just an ordinary link, the type of link that you see in an address bar of the internet. So here we see HTTPS, like :// like that's something you see in most websites, right? It's completely normal. And then API, we know that word, api.airtable.com. And this is just a website, just a normal, name of a website. And that's going to be kind of wherever you have your database, it's just going to be that place. Or and a lot of times you're building an API, to this e-commerce store or anything like that, a CRM, and that's where you'll see that. It's just completely normal, right? So this is the version, and this is the location. It's kind of a weird code, but it says it's the location of my base, or the little spreadsheet thing. And then the test underscore table 2 is the name of my base. Okay, so I chose not to use spaces because when you include spaces there, it puts in like 20% and all these weird things. So instead of a space, I gave it an underscore when I named the table, and that just makes it easier for you to read, a little shorter, a little cleaner. So that is a URL, and that's all we're talking about here. It's one of the critical factors in order to tell your API where to go to get to the kitchen, to get to the food, right? But really, it's just sort of a normal thing. If you can figure out what component we're going to talk about next, brownie points for you. These two are both the same component, and they are the headers. So the first header is authorization, and literally you'll be like, you might have to just copy and paste this very word, authorization, right? And then this bearer token thing, bearer, your secret API token. Like, what does that mean? Bearer, like the bearer is the place where you're getting it from. And then the next header is the content type. And you'll see this a lot for JSON APIs, application/JSON. So this is just a matter of copying and pasting this information into the right place. So next, we'll look at the next little chunk of this, and it's the data that's in there. And now notice that we have a little apostrophe that we've brought in, and we've got a curly brace, right? And the next line includes quotation marks, the word records, and we'll see this a lot with APIs. And then we have a colon followed by a bracket. So these are super simple things, right? And really, you don't have to remember how to type these things or even know what they mean. You just have to be able to copy and paste them and make sure they look rightish, and that in the end, they look sort of symmetrical. So the next line is another curly brace. So you can tell we're not done because we have open curly brace, and then open quotes, close quotes, colon, and then open bracket, and then another open curly brace. So you know that we haven't even reached the middle yet, okay? And then, so as we continue down, and this is how code is written, they do a lot of hard returns. It's like boom, boom, boom. Here we are with the word fields, and this is something that you'll also see a lot of as you're copying and pasting things in. Watch for this word records, watch for fields, a colon, and then another open curly brace. And you know we're not quite to the middle yet because we're still opening things up. And then we get down to user ID in quotes, colon, and then another some more quotes, a comma, which means it's an item in a list. That means there's going to be more than one of these things. Then the next item, so both of these things are like fields, right? They're kind of indented underneath, so you know both of these things are kind of one of those things. And here's another one. And notice that it's got another comma here, and we've got some quotes and some more quotes, and then curly bracket. And look at this, end curly bracket. So you know that's the end of that thing, okay? As we continue down, we've got another curly bracket. So we've ended another piece of it. So now we know we're past the middle of this thing, and we're kind of backing out in the symmetrical manner that we went in. And so we've got this, this curly brace that's facing kind of towards the middle. If you kind of turn your head to the side, and then another curly brace. So we have here a comma, which means that everything within here, so 1 curly brace, 2 curly brace, 3 curly brace, and then on the close end we have 1 curly brace, 2 curly brace, 3 curly brace. And so we know that everything here is part of an item, and this is basically like one record, right? And so we can look at this and say, okay, this is one record, and we're done. So that's the end of the record. It's as much as that. So these are words in English. It's not, it's not completely cryptic. What if we wanted more than one record? Then it would look like this. We'd have the first record, and you see that comma, and then the second record here, second record. And then if you notice the bracket here after the word records, right? This bracket is like going to be all the records. And then here is the close bracket, right? And that closes off all of the records. And we can say, oh, okay, we're talking about records here. We open it up with a bracket, we close it with a bracket. That's symmetry. It's very recognizable. Like you don't have to know that it needs like what kind of thing is needed or which order they should be in. You just need to know when you're copying and pasting, like, oh, I'm copying one record, so I will end here. or I know that these are two records because this is indented under here. There's a thing, and there's a comma. Okay, so that's a record thing, and then the next thing is a record thing, and that ends here, and then all of the record things end with this bracket. So that's, now you know kind of what's going on here. Not that you would need to ever write this necessarily, but things can get kind of messed up as you adapt it for your needs. You're like, okay, here's the code, and oh, I'm going to change this little thing because I want to collect this instead of that. And I'm going to get this different information now with this. And so, and as you change things, you sometimes things get messed up, and you're like, wait a second. How many curly braces are there? Oh, is there a bracket at the end? Okay, I've got a bracket at the end, and then does this look right? I've got a curly brace. Is that, and the way to tell is just by looking up here, and it's a mirror, right? It's mirrored. It's completely symmetrical. And so then it's got this apostrophe, which concludes that apostrophe. And that's kind of the bookends of this little script here. So that's all the data that we will be looking at. So, and again, that's just a second record, but we won't need that for this use case. Notice that if we're just going to use this part, that we'll need to delete that little comma there. So this is just the first piece, and this is like really all you need to be thinking about when you copy and paste things around. Like these are the pieces, and you can get to this. I'll show you how to do this later, but you can get to it in the documentation of Airtable. It provides all of it for you. And see this little comma there? You would just, if you were working with this piece, you would just make sure then you deleted it so that it's not there if you just need one record, which is in our use case today. And so let's jump over into Voiceflow. Now, you've seen like Voiceflow before maybe, and if you haven't, go check it out. It's great. I have a couple of videos on creating your first AI agent in Voiceflow. Basically, this is the symbol of what's going on in your workflow, in your agentic workflow. And here is in this side panel is all the stuff represented behind the scenes here. So I will read this. This block does two things. It posts. This means it sends the user's question to the Airtable on a new row. It's because it's sending this user question that we then captured here, and it posts, right? So it sends that user's question to the Airtable, to the kitchen, if you will, to put some food in the kitchen on a new row at the bottom of the table. And number two, it creates a record ID for this unique exchange, and we call it an ID in JSON script, and we can make this magically appear later with this variable. So it's the Airtable ID. This is all the information where it's put. Okay, so you're gonna feed in from the documentation in Airtable. You can feed it all right into here. So if we just look at the zoom in a little bit, and we just look at this panel here with all the different pieces. If we start out here, the 5 components of API calls, right? So we can tell what type of API we're using here. What type of API is this? Yes, it is a post API, correct. And now the next thing is the link, right? Where's the kitchen? Where's the exact location, those coordinates, if you will, to the kitchen location? And where can we find that information? Where are we going to post it in here if we were working with this API and kind of building it out in Airtable? Yes, it's right there. And it shows you right there. So you can see airtable.com, right? It's just a URL or a curl, a C URL, curl in this case. So next is the headers, right? And you see this, like this is in our list here, and there they are. They're the headers. And there's 2 types. We talked about the bearer token, and that's the long API key, and that's, you hear this API key. Oh, an API key, like that's the thing that you need to take here and paste in there, and I'll show you how to do that later. But now you know, like those are the headers. In this use case, there are no parameters. This is the body, and we just paste in the record there. You may need to click on raw here in order to get right into the code. And after we define what we're going to capture there at the very bottom, then we're done. And I'm not going to show you very much about that now because it's a little bit tricky, but I'll walk you through the trickiness some other time. And for now, just remember these 6 components of APIs. And that's kind of like a fun story. You know, you're in a restaurant, you've got the customer here, and they're making the type of call or request for the API. You've got the menu there that kind of describes what the call is, and that's the body, right? You've got the location of the kitchen, which is the link, and you can see all these things, right? The headers are the authorization and talking about what type of content that this is going to be in the code and application/JSON, and then we don't have to do anything with parameters this time. We've talked about the body plenty, and then the things that happen next, and this could be any number of things, and there's it's kind of somewhat open-ended, but I'll walk you through more of it later. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you made it this far, please give me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.